To Susan Sullivan, who is from Philadelphia. She's a professor of law and politics at Temple University. Professor, thank you so much for your time. I mean, I don't know how much detail you've seen about the various legal challenges that the Trump campaign team is launching, but out of any that you've seen, do you see any that appear legitimate in the eyes of the law?
Well, so far, no. We haven't really seen any allegations of real fraud. There was a rumor that there was one Trump supporter who tried to vote twice. But the voting here, mainly because President Trump was so vocal in advance of the election that he was going to challenge anything that wasn't going his way. But people have been extremely careful to follow the rules, to be very transparent, so that if there were any type of fraud in the counting process, it would be very easy to find, and none of those procedures are being challenged. So no, we haven't really seen anything that would suggest that President Trump's campaign really has a legitimate claim to challenge thus far any of the results.
And of course, he hasn't yet presented any evidence, certainly not made it public. Are you therefore saying that his legal arguments appear weak? Because if it is true that dead people have voted, well, obviously that would be illegal. If people who have left a state have voted in that state, that would also be illegal. That's a little bit of an anomaly. Australia has this wonderful system that wherever you're from in Australia, wherever you are at the moment of the election, you can vote there. But in the US, you have to vote in your state or the state where you're registered.
You do indeed. And in fact, you have to vote within the precinct, which is within the county, which is within the state. So they're very specific areas where you can actually show up and vote. But of course, because of the pandemic and because the Democrats were concerned that there might be voter intimidation, there was a big push because of that to go out and vote early by mail. And so, you know, the Postal Service has been overwhelmed. There have been, I think, over 1 million postal votes. So that has really, slowed things down too. But again, they're very specific about where you can vote. So those in-person votes are very, very specific, and signatures are checked against identification and against addresses. So it's very meticulous, very specific. It is made more difficult because every state has its own mechanisms for counting votes. Some use paper ballots, some use scanners. It's a little bonkers. I mean, in the United States, one would think there would be a uniform method for 360 million people to vote, and that is why, again, we've seen these delays.
This has to be resolved quickly. We're learning about laws that we don't normally know about because of this very particular situation. So there's a law that says within 5 weeks, a state has to declare a winner. So 5 weeks this year would be December the 8th. And if a state doesn't declare a winner by December the 8th, Congress has the right to discount that state's electoral college votes in the final tally. Could that possibly be a tactic that Donald Trump might care to employ? Make sure that litigation continues for so long that states where he's in danger of losing, those electoral college votes don't count?
I think that would be highly unlikely. I think once you've got votes counted, it's very difficult for a court to set them aside. I mean, that would be such an affront to the, to the notion of democracy. So I think that's unlikely. I think if litigation does continue, there would be various procedures that could be employed to request stays from the courts. But I also think it is unlikely that a state would not certify. That certification itself could be challenged. But I do think that's unlikely. I think we're going to see results. We may see results, certainly from Pennsylvania. I would anticipate we get those results today. And I think, we reach the point where, yes, there is a small margin of error, but the states don't release that information lightly. And it is, with the possible exception of Georgia, where Joe Biden's lead overnight, he basically took over the lead from President Trump, and there are 1,096 votes that separate them. So Georgia might have a hard time really coming out with something that is definitive. But once we get Pennsylvania and Nevada and Arizona, then it's going to be game over. So I think it's unlikely that you would see Congress acting to prevent a state from certifying in any way, simply because, as I say, that would undermine the whole principle of democracy. Once those votes are counted, it is very difficult for a legislature or a court to set them aside for any reason.
Professor, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much indeed. Susan Sullivan speaking to us from
Very
Philadelphia.
welcome.